G'day, my name's David Burton and I'm a playwright and director and theatre maker working here in Brisbane, Queensland, Meanjin. And I'm the writer of April's Fool, a verbatim play written in 2009. And I'm here to answer some of the most frequently asked questions about it and a little bit about how it was created and made. Make sure you stick around to the end of the video because I am going to go through some of the most commonly performed monologues or scenes from the scenes from the play, and talk about important things that I like actors to remember and that may be useful as you study or perform this play. So April's Fool was written in 2009, which only a short matter of months after the death of Christian Toowoomba. So if you don't know what the play's about, it's all a true story. Christian Toowoomba was a really intelligent, articulate young man, and just 2 weeks shy of his 19th birthday, he went to a music festival in Toowoomba. Toowoomba's a reasonably sized city in inland Queensland. And he went to a music festival, and there he took some illicit drugs and was able to come home, and he said goodnight to his father, collapsed into bed, and basically never woke up. His father found him unconscious the next morning, having difficulty breathing. He rushed him to hospital, and our story picks up from there, basically covering the 7 days that Christian was in hospital before his passing. Naturally, it was a really deeply moving story for me personally. When I wrote it, I was in my early 20s. This is really one of the first major plays I wrote, and it wasn't kind of my idea, so to speak. So in Toowoomba, there's this beautiful theatre called the Empire Theatre, and at that time, they had something called the Empire Theatre Projects Company. And the Empire Theatre Projects Company was under the leadership at that stage of a fantastic Queensland theatre maker by the name of Lewis Jones, who ended up directing the first production of April's Fool. And he had been in contact with, I think through a work event, Christian's godmother. And they were just at a work event, and Christian's godmother was a working stage manager, so in the theatre scene in Queensland. And Lewis and her struck up a conversation, and this story came out, and the story was of Christian's passing, that had only happened at that point kind of very recently. And Nicole, the godmother, shared at that stage that Christian's father had written a journal during his time in hospital, watching over his son, and the journal was called April's Fool. And part of the discussion that they were kind of having internally as a family, or part of the thinking, was, what can we do with this document? From there, Lewis thought that, and reading the document, he thought, there's a play here, there's a theatrical work here, and instantly he knew it would be probably verbatim, or mixed in with some verbatim. I knew Lewis a little bit at that time. Lewis approached me, and Lewis kind of opened or started with the pitch of that the play would be for a teenage audience about this circumstance, but also about drug taking generally, and the consequences of drug taking and healthy habits and so on. From there, we started a process, and I knew pretty soon after reading the document and talking to Helena and David, Christian's parents, once, that there was enough here in their story for kind of just one story, and for the play to be about one family, and to center on that and dramaturgically kind of anchor it in that, because I thought that was the most effective way we were very, very cautious that we didn't want to write a don't do drugs play, because we thought that would be the quickest way to turn off our teenage audience, to kind of have people at the front of the room wagging their finger and saying don't do drugs. That didn't seem particularly effective to us. So instead, just telling a very human story of what happened to this individual would encompass so much more. So I sat with David and Helena, and David and Helena called in a network of Christians, friends and colleagues, and anyone who was connected to him. And everybody turned up in the same room. And David and Helena basically said, look, this happens with our blessing. This is what's going to happen. And David would like to ask you questions and interview you. And the text you use will be used, you say will be used in a play, or has the chance to be used in a public performance. Go forth. And if you want to talk to David, great. And if you don't, no worries. And pretty much everyone talked to me. There were a few people who straight off did not, or who were very nervous. And I never pushed them because it was so sensitive. And like I say, we were less than 6 months from Christian's passing, so it was all very raw. But nevertheless, a number of people talked. The only person I chased was the character Stephen in the play. I kind of insisted I really would like to talk to you. And Stephen eventually sat with me. I did 3 interviews each with Helena and David, sitting with them for about 2 hours at a time. So they alone, I had like 12 hours of interviews with, and then everybody else made up. I think I ended up with about 25 hours of recorded material. And I was just looking for story. I was just looking for ways to support the original journal document, and also come up with different themes or ideas. Like it became fairly obvious that, every member of the family talked about this Northern Territory trip. Some people just kind of naturally stumbled into beautiful monologues, like Carla. I interviewed her very early on in the process. And I just sat and asked questions as a kind of, as a young man kind of going where I was naturally curious. We ended up with over 25 hours of material, and I needed to get it down to about a 90-minute play. And then I did. I kind of re-listened to everything and transcribed a lot of stuff, and I created a whole system of cards on a wall that kind of time-coded everything, and it became clear that the map of the show was about this spine of time in the hospital, but then there was going to be all these other interactions and all these other scenes that would dip in and out, and monologues and stuff. And that was that. I delivered a first draft, and really kind of naturally the structure was kind of there and kind of solid, but it was a bit overwritten. I'd included a bit too much stuff. So I sat with Lewis and a cast of actors in a few creative developments, and it was basically a process of winnowing down that script to a point where it was like ready to go into rehearsal, where Lewis would direct. Side note, April's Fool is a really... The only other thing I'd say about that process is obviously that interview process was life-changing. What I really love about Verbatim Theatre and what April's Fool taught me is... April's Fool taught me a lot of different things, but one of the things it taught me is that everyone has a story, like no one is boring. And it's amazing what people will tell you if you sit and leave space for them to tell it. It's kind of informed my work now, kind of a decade and more on, now that I do psychology and therapy work. It's really informative of that. And it was also amazing to listen to people being very vulnerable about someone they loved and how connected we all are. That was so strong for me and so huge. And it was also really important for me to hear as a young man then. I was not married. I was single and kind of trying to figure out who I was as a person as well. And so it was really informative. In one of those creative developments, as a side note, one of the actors cast in one of those creative developments was a young woman who I instantly knew I was very attracted to, and she would become my wife, Emily Burton, and now we have 2 children together. So April's Fool really it is deeply, deeply meaningful for me personally. And of course, I grew attached to this family. I met Danica and Ari when they were very young, and I'm still connected to the family through social media, and I get occasional updates through there. I know Danica's a mother now, and Helene is a grandmother, and David's a grandfather, which is a beautiful thing to behold. So it's lovely to kind of have that long-term connection. We rehearsed the play, and the play operated much like a normal rehearsal. We cast. That original production had 5 actors, and it had some projection. And I utilised all the techniques that I had kind of studied in verbatim theatre vaguely, which if you're a school student, you'll know. Actors took on multiple roles. And we used projection, and we used fourth wall breaking. We used narration. Part of the thing, and if you're staging this work or any verbatim work, I really encourage you to experiment with what moments are staged, what moments are narrated and don't need staging. When do you stage and narrate as kind of different layers? How you use music, how you use tech to create a particular moment. All of that's deeply informative, and all of it's experimentation that kind of happens in the room, happens in development space, or happens in a rehearsal. When the actors were at a point where they were running the show, before we added any tech, Lewis and I talked, and I felt like it was going to be most ethical and most appropriate for David and Helena to watch a run of the work. So there was this kind of amazing afternoon where Helena and David came into rehearsals, and we just ran the show for them in a room. And it was deeply emotional. It was very positive. I don't want to put words in their mouth, but understanding a little bit of what they'd been through, and being with them for the journey and watching them see the show, there was a great deal of catharsis in their feelings being validated, and hearing what other people's experiences of Christian were for particular moments and particular instances in his life were really, really informative. Now, it's 15 years on, the play is still relevant. It had a Southeast Queensland tour. It toured nationally in 2012. And as I speak to you now, it's 2024, so we've passed the 10-year anniversary of Christian's death, which is mind-boggling. And I can now say thousands of school students have seen the show, thousands of people have seen the show. And at the moment, as I talk to you, it's touring nationally with Grin and Tonic theatre troupe, which is a 2-hander version where I've slimmed down the script and worked with another director, Jason Klarwein, to put together a different version of it that's just a bit shorter than the one that's here, or the one that Empire put on for tourability. That's been a really interesting process, seeing it, 10 or 15 years on as a father myself now, and watching school students, react to it. 2 actors switching between roles, and different techniques that Jason has used, that I haven't, that are not mine, like the use of video footage or music. That's why if you're creating verbatim, if that's something you're looking at, really experimenting with that tech can be deeply informative about how you set up a particular moment, how you signal an emotional impact in the audience. All of that's huge. Now, if you're an actor, there's a few kind of key monologues that a lot of young actors strike out at. I would say I've talked to a lot of different actors, student actors and professional actors who have put on this work, and there's an assumption that you need to kind of mimic the real person. And I different playwrights will differ on this. I generally discourage actors from trying to do that because I think it can get in the way. When you're trying to put on an accent or you're trying to force a mannerism, I think it's less interesting than what is really artistic work, which is these are characters. They're characters through my lens. Also, it's not like I can give you some great secret to, you know, how this person acted that will unlock the truth of that character. The truth of the character is how you find it and how you interpret it. Also, I interviewed these people 15 years ago, so there's some conversations I don't remember. I would also generally say, I would generally warn people off the gigantic Helena monologue, particularly if you're an adolescent actor or a youth actor. It's a deeply moving piece from Helena. It's also a piece that is just, for me, so rooted and grounded in motherhood and being on the earth for a few decades. If you're an adolescent actor, if you're studying this in school, I would say, Eliza's one of the most frequent monologues that I see performed by adolescent actors or get asked about. And the trick with Eliza, it's not a trick, but the best way, and this goes for a lot of the different performances and a lot of the different characters in the show, is that Eliza and all of these characters, you kind of stop the play if you play it like the character is sad already. You do what we call endgame it, where you're letting on the audience know that that Christian's going to pass and you're very broken up about it. Now that may be true, but it stops momentum and it actually makes it less emotionally effective. Take Romeo and Juliet, for example. At the beginning of Romeo and Juliet, we are told, Shakespeare tells us very directly, that these two characters are going to die. But the characters in the play don't know that. In fact, the way that play works is those characters are filled with hope for a big, bright, romantic future, which makes it all the more crushing when they pass at the end. So in a monologue like Eliza, even though she's telling a story in past tense, play the joy of meeting this dorky kid who you kind of have a crush on, and all the joy of that, and all the kind of butterflies and excitement that come up with that. Don't play it foreshadowing the sadness that's going to come. Let the sadness drop in at the very end when she has that moment. And I would say that's similar for a lot of these characters. Do your best to stay in the present moment with them and find as much colour as you can. Stephen's a very difficult monologue because his thoughts are disconnected because of where he's from and his background. Carla's a beautiful monologue, and you can easily, if you need to do a monologue for class or something, you can easily cut out Kate's bits to make Carla a monologue. I never tire of getting emails from students and different people who have put this show on and the impact it's had. I love sitting in the back of classrooms watching different actors put it on. And I really enjoy sending Helena a message every few years saying, just so you know, it's still having an impact. I think that's incredibly meaningful to her and to the family at large, or at least I hope it is. Thanks for being interested. I've written a bunch of other plays and I'll be releasing more videos talking about them and as well about other stuff that I'm reading and writing. So feel free to like and subscribe and share. Thank you so much for tuning in.